Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. President Trump urges fellow Republicans to vote for the release of the Epstein files, maintaining we have nothing to hide. The UN Security Council considers a Gaza stabilization force, but both Israel and Hamas air concerns over the possible resolution. Former Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has been sentenced to death after being found guilty of crimes against humanity. Now, US President Donald Trump has called on his fellow Republicans to vote for the release of the Epstein files. Writing on Truth Social, the president said, "We have nothing to hide, and it was time to move on from the so-called Democrat hoax." Thousands of documents relating to the convicted paedophile and disgraced financier were released last week. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Al Arabiya senior presenter Rawia Alami and Jono Hayes, Dubai 92 presenter. Rawia, let's start with you right now. We talk about the Epstein files. They don't seem to be going away. It seems to be the story that keeps on giving. But Trump has said we've nothing to hide. He's now made another U-turn and said, let's release these Epstein files. But why did he fight for the files to not be released? It's all a little bit confusing.
And he fought for many years, basically, for those files, as you said, not to be released. It is, as you said, it's 180 degrees turn. It's a reversal onto his previous position. And I think the answer depends on whether his latest position or this reversal is real or not. Is it real or is it symbolic? Is it an actual move towards transparency, or is it a tactical move? Now, Republican lawmakers, especially those who have been pushing for the release of the Epstein files, seem to think or suspect that Trump's change of stance may have been just a smokescreen rather than a genuine commitment to transparency. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene, his longtime loyalist, turned against him basically on the Epstein files. She said that she was still baffled by his previous opposition to their release, yet she was also wondering whether this his latest position signals weakness or it is just a strategic calculation. Now, there could be many reasons behind it. It could be damage control, because apparently the Epstein files are the only weak point that are capable of fracturing Trump's MAGA base and make him lose his loyalists like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Also, recent polls have shown that over 63% of Americans are not happy with the way his administration has actually handled the Epstein files. Or it could be simply that it is the only move available to him at this stage, especially with the vote on their release looming, with so many Republicans preparing to vote for their release. And maybe he was also encouraged by the information that was leaked by the recent Epstein emails that don't really show any wrongdoing on the part of Trump.
And I think this is the interesting point. We did see those emails that the Democrats released from Jeffrey Epstein and the correspondent between Michael Wolff, one of the biographers. And there didn't appear to be any smoking gun, did they, Jono, when it came to Donald Trump? And I think that this has probably given him a little bit of confidence, as well as what Rawia says. We're seeing these massive cracks open up when it comes to the MAGA base, because when Donald Trump was campaigning, he said we would release the Epstein files. And they haven't been released, and we've seen Peter Mandelson in the UK, obviously Prince Andrew too. So lots of people have been involved in the tentacles of the Epstein files.
And you have to question if there's the policy that it may have been to protect the victims, that might have been why at that point you were holding back from releasing the full files. Virginia Giuffre and her statements that are in there say that Donald Trump was nothing but polite to her. So maybe the point that they were waiting until they were sure they could release these files without there being any backlash to make 100% sure that there was going to be no issues, I guess. there may also be the element that there's other people who are listed in there as well. We don't know who is in there. We know Bill Clinton is in there. We know that Lex Wexner is in there as well. But you have to worry about who else might be in those documents that's in there. On the surface, it might look like the reversal is managing the political damage here, but it might be genuine transparency on the part of Donald Trump to think, I am safe in here, I've got nothing to hide, which is what he's reiterated again and again. And certainly from the leaked documents that you see, you would think that that might be the case. If the Democrats are picking and choosing what they're releasing, and what they've released so far have got nothing incriminating, you then have to wonder what else could possibly be in there that would be incriminating. Because you would take this as a perfect opportunity to take it down a peg or two, to hit the administration.
You would assume that
You'd assume
that would be the first thing they would release.
If you had full access to it, then you would.
Yeah.
Or you would have looked at it pre-election and said, the Democrats had access as well. They could have released it pre-election. In which case you would have said, if there's nothing in there that's damning, it wouldn't have affected the election. If there was, it would have made a very different election outcome, potentially. So I think you probably would have released them by now. So I think we're seeing some actual transparency on the part of the Trump administration at this point. Again, he's claimed over and over again there's nothing to hide. The part from the Republicans is that they now want, there's this want to get this transparency through, and I feel like that appetite for that is what's forcing his hand on this situation. And there's been so many other things going on within the camp of the administration right now. He's gotten to it bit by bit, but I think this has been the one dog that hasn't stopped barking throughout the entire presidency. And we've had the JFK files, we've had the alien files that he wanted released, everything except the Epstein files. And if you're to believe what the administration are saying, it was to protect victims up until this point. So that may be what we're seeing right now. And I think it's transparency that's required, because otherwise he is at risk of losing some of his long-term followers. And you have to say that maybe it's the time.
And also people that he got and people who voted for him when he was campaigning and said, I would release these Epstein files. But there's a whole conversation happening at the moment, because if we look at people who've taken the fall for the Epstein files, it's been 3 British people, Peter Mandelson, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and Ghislaine Maxwell, all of them being British. And in the US, everyone seems to have been pretty protected. Rawia, I don't know what your thoughts on this is, but there's been a lot of talk and analysis about how this has gone down in Britain.
There has. Yes, there has indeed, definitely. I mean, the media has been talking about it since especially the leaked recent emails were released, basically. The British media is talking about it, the US media is talking about it, and everybody seems to basically conclude that the way these scandals are handled in the UK or generally in Europe is with much more seriousness, and therefore the repercussions of such scandals we've seen in the UK, it has made a monarch lose his status and his prince title as well. Also a diplomat lost a lot because of this scandal. While in the US, it seems to be different. It seems to be handled with less seriousness, with less repercussions. So I don't know, maybe President Trump relies on that as well.
Look, I think the one person who is at risk of losing everything from these files, if there was anything incriminating in there, is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton is a has-been. And Bill Clinton has gotten the flack on being in the documents. We know that he's in there. He's mentioned in there several times. He's gotten the flack for it as well. He's not holding a position. And I think, to be fair, Bill Clinton's reputation has been tarnished for a lot longer than that. He hadn't as much to fight for. The issue with Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor is that he portrayed this holier-than-thou image and continued to do so, and continues to, against the allegations that are set against him, say that they are incorrect, which he's perfectly within his right to do. But there is, again, the smoke with the fire to go along with that one indicates that he has portrayed the image of, I am untouchable. There's that element of, and we've discussed this before, where he almost feels that he's got that right, that he's not.
Birthright.
Exactly, that he's untouchable. And that was where the issue came from as well. And I think that's probably why you took people out of power, because they were in the Epstein files, which makes sense. Donald Trump is the part of the domino who's still in power. So I think that's why we need to get these documents out there, to prove and say there's nothing in there. We're all good, hands washed clean. We know that he had a connection with Jeffrey Epstein. We know that they knew each other. We know that they were in the same circles and the same connections. What we now need to find out is, how deep did that go? And if there's nothing there, then we're fine. Prince Andrew said he didn't even know him. And he said that over and over again. before this had all come to the light and the allegations against him, which still are there, he said, no, that's nothing to do with them. But he portrayed a different image compared to what Donald Trump had done. And I think that's the difference.
And I think we must remember Virginia Giuffre, one of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, who's no longer with us, wrote a memoir and always spoke about how good Donald Trump was to her. And she never, ever said he was implicated in anything like this. So Donald Trump can rest that Virginia Giuffre always said that he was completely above board, never saw anything indecent coming from President Trump. And obviously in the latest leaked emails, we also see Donald Trump not incriminated in those. And I'm sure as time goes on, we will be speaking about these Epstein files again, because it seems to be the story or the dog that never stops barking, as Jono says. Now let's move on to another story. And the UN Security Council will vote on supporting an international stabilization force for Gaza this evening, backing President Trump's peace plan. It could pave the way for a Palestinian statehood, something Israel continues to oppose. Hamas has also called the resolution dangerous and an attempt to subject the Gaza Strip to international authority. So, Jono, the UN Security Council, they are voting this evening on this US-backed Gaza plan we spoke a lot about when it came into force. How much influence do you think the Council will have on Israel's stance? And also this broader push for a Palestinian statehood, which Israel is so vehemently against?
So what we're seeing here is the UN Security Council adding a bit of diplomatic weight behind the call for a Palestinian statehood, which many, many nations have already said they would formally recognise. Officially, on paper up until this point, as we're now at phase 2, a Palestinian state cannot exist because it lacks any of the 3 requirements for that. What we would see the UN do here is not enforce that or not bring it into play, but would move it one step closer, which is what a lot of the world has called for. And we knew when the UN came back into session again in September, and we had many, many countries say, hundreds of countries say, we would like to see a Palestinian state. This is further ratifying that, so to speak. And although, yes, it moves it one step further, Israel still have the card to play here, bizarrely, that they can oppose the Palestinian state. Netanyahu's main issue right now is that the far right, Ben Gvir and cronies in the far right, are so vehemently opposed to this that if Netanyahu comes out and say, OK, you can have the Palestinian state, he risks losing them and therefore losing the Knesset and therefore losing power. And that's something that he can't risk happening.
And that's a very difficult position to be in. And actually, a little bit earlier, Israeli far-right National Security Minister Ben Gvir urges Prime Minister Netanyahu to order targeted assassinations of senior officials of the Palestinian Authority and to arrest Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas if the UN endorses the recognition of a Palestinian state. That's pretty strong, Rawia.
It is pretty strong. And we have to remember that the clause that the far-right ministers and members of government in Israel are outraged about has a precondition for the Palestinian state, which is reform within the Palestinian Authority. If I may just read the clause, it says that if there were reforms within the Palestinian Authority, the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. So the entire clause is contingent on a condition, which is reform or having a Palestinian Authority to start with, and reform within the Palestinian Authority because of corruption and so many other issues that the Israelis, the Americans, even the Palestinians have against the Palestinian Authority. So if the Israeli government arrests the Palestinian president or undermines any reform, then the entire precondition for a Palestinian state will not be there. Also, we have to remember that there are so many Security Council resolutions that against Israel, or at least, makes Israel, binds Israel to withdraw from territory, or so many other sorts of things, and it never actually implemented any of those resolutions. So even if this resolution passes, and the expectation that it will pass, even though there's a Russian competing draft, if you want, for this resolution, that doesn't mean much. It doesn't mean Israel will implement it, and it doesn't mean that eventually it might lead to a Palestinian state.
And it's interesting because Russia and China could veto this, and they widely expected to do so. But it's interesting speaking to you and hearing what you're saying there about Israel not maybe implementing this, because I actually wonder, Donald Trump, this was his 20-point peace plan. He was determined to make sure this happened and saw it through. We saw him travel to the region after the peace plan had been put together. He had close talks with the Arab nations involved in this peace plan. It's been really well constructed. I don't know, Jono, if you think Donald Trump is just going to keep the pressure on Israel so they have to follow through with this.
Well, they will. My thinking is that they will have to fold regardless of the opposition from the far right, and Netanyahu will go back and say, I don't really have a choice here. My hands are tied. US backing is what we require that in order to continue with whatever cause they're currently on. But this Board of Peace, which is the initial setup plan, which is the first step towards, as we said, phase 2, which we knew would be the trickiest one. We knew it was going to be the most difficult. The plan to rebuild and to demilitarize Gaza, all of that is in there with this Board of Peace, which now also Israel are saying, we don't want that Board of Peace because that we see as a step towards a Palestinian statehood. And you just think, well, what do you want then? And it's the far right of the Knesset who are saying this, but at the same time, this is part of the plan. You signed on to the plan. This was what you wanted in the first place. You have to question, well, what do Israel want then? Nobody's saying that Hamas are going to have a seat at the table if it comes to governing Gaza in its current guise. The Palestinian Authority, in its current guise, is not going to have a seat at the table without some major reform. And nobody's saying that that's the case. So I think there will obviously be some bits and pieces that are moving around that you have to see change first and foremost. But there's so many terms and conditions that have been put in place by Israel. I do think Donald Trump needs this plan to come to fruition. I do think he will put the thumb down firmly and put pressure on them in order to actually agree to this. But like Rawia said, it's a resolution. It may mean absolutely nothing. It's very akin to when many of the states, and we've said that already, in September recognized a Palestinian state. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's in action. It just means that it's a step in the right direction towards that very, very pivotal step, which is it's a lot, and I think you'll agree, Rawia, that's a long way away. We're a long way away from the Palestinian state.
It's absolutely a long way away, and we should not forget that President Trump's support for a Palestinian state doesn't come for the sake of the Palestinian state or the self-determination of the Palestinian people. It is a precondition for a peace treaty and Saudi Arabia entering the Abrahamic Accords with Israel and having normalization with Israel. This, for President Trump, is pivotal, is vital. It is very important since he considers the Abraham Accords as his biggest foreign policy achievements, and also now with the end of the war and the Gaza peace plan. So he will push for it in as far it's going to lead to that.
And remember, Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince, arrives in Washington to meet Donald Trump tomorrow at this pivotal time, and exactly what we're discussing here and what the UN is due to vote on. But as both of you say, very interesting there that this is the second phase of that 20-point plan and probably the most tricky one to get through. But thank you for your thoughts on that. Let's move on to another story now. And former Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has been sentenced to death after being found guilty of crimes against humanity. The ousted leader was convicted of ordering a crackdown on a student-led protest. The UN estimates up to 1,400 people were killed in the violence. Security has now been increased across Bangladesh over fears of backlash. Rawia, so this was actually a really big story that came out today. Does Hasina's death sentence actually bring about justice for the people who, of course, lost their lives in these protests? Or is it just more about politics and possibly sending a message?
It's a bit of both. I mean, at the end of the day, the verdict operates within the framework of justice. It is some form of measure of recognition of the victims. We're talking about between 800 and 1,400 people were killed, ordered to kill by Sheikh Hasina. But we have to remember something about the tribunal that actually released this verdict itself. It has a very politicized history. First of all, it was revived or established by Sheikh Hasina herself to go after her political opponents. And now it is being used by her political opponents against her. So there was the history of the tribunal has a clear perception of it being politicized and used to settle political scores, basically. The opposition to the interim government is saying that the primary motive of this verdict appears to be dismantling Hasina's party, which is the Awami League, ahead of the planned elections. Obviously, after this verdict, even though she's in India and doesn't seem to be, there will be any, at least intentions to extradite her, and she operates in India, yet if after this verdict, if there is a decision to restrict her activities or prohibit them, then she's going to find it very hard to operate or have any influence in Bangladesh.
And Jono, as you did mention to me right there, right now, Hasina is in exile. She's living in India. She's in Delhi at the moment. And the big question is, will India actually extradite her? And no one seems to be 100% sure, but India have come out and said India remains committed to the best interests of the people of Bangladesh. We will always engage constructively with all stakeholders to that end. So we've heard from India's foreign ministry today in a statement.
This is our second extradition order. The first one was for far less of a crime, contempt of court, which was in June of this year as well. And on that, they did not execute that extradition order. And India has got no obligation at all, aside from keeping the peace, to extradite someone to Bangladesh, especially to carry out a death sentence when you take into consideration the humanitarian issue that's at bay here because of the fact that it was, and we don't know anything about the trial necessarily, but it was done in absentia, which means that she wasn't there to represent herself and didn't have representation.
But she also defied court orders to go back and represent herself in India. So she wouldn't go back to the court. So she was invited, but didn't go back.
But again, if you get invited back and you're held in court, you know exactly what's coming for you. You're not going to likely to do that. The question remains now what happens when the elections are upcoming, because if Bangladesh comes in with a brand new government, the elected government come into power, India wants to keep the peace. Yes, they might bow, India might bow to political pressure and say, right, let's extradite her, let's get rid of that problem. Is it likely to happen? Not so much. It's likely to see a whole stack of appeals that are on the way. Potentially she can go to The Hague with this. However, Bangladesh don't sign on to The Hague, to the Rome Accord that's there, so they don't actually, they're not bound by that. So it can't really be overturned by The Hague. So this will probably still stand depending on who comes into power next and who comes into government next. So it really is one of those things that we're not likely to see how it's going to play out unless there was an issue where you thought this is going to cause a diplomatic crisis and therefore India would say, right, we need to move on this now. But a whole stack of questions will then be raised about, was it a fair trial? What went on behind closed doors? And that would need to be answered.
And another thing is this story has been so massive when it comes to Bangladesh. This was broadcast live on national TV. It's picked up so much interest in the country. We were talking about those deadly protests that happened and what Sheikh Hasina has been charged with. But I think there's a lot of concern about unrest again in Bangladesh when it comes to the political world there, about which party can run when the elections come up. And there's a lot of feeling in the country at the moment, and I think there are concerns about safety.
And I think it's the Awami League is banned. We know that, and she's trying to run that from India right now. So in the upcoming elections, if they are banned, which they currently are, they're not eligible to stand in an election. I think what this death sentence, although it seems on the surface like this is very severe, what it also does is it takes that party out of being a major player in that election and then removes them from the equation, which is exactly what they want. So the message is very clear. The message is politically driven, and that's where I think it may stand. And we've seen many leaders who've sat in exile for their entirety of their lives without too much of an issue. Not many of them with death penalties hanging over their head, granted. But I think that's probably, unless there's something massive shift at the end of this election, I don't think we're going to see a massive change there, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in Bangladesh and when those elections do come up. But But, you know, the student-led uprising last year led to this, and Bangladesh isn't the only country that's seen that. We see those student-led uprisings that do force change in a lot of countries, and Bangladesh was just one of them. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Stay right there as we move on to another story now. And police in India say hacked CCTV footage from a maternity hospital was sold on Telegram, exposing serious privacy talks. The video showed patients during medical exams, and investigators uncovered a nationwide cybercrime network targeting tens of thousands of cameras. Authorities have arrested 8 people, and experts warn weak passwords and unsecured systems make such breaches easy. Jono, let's get into this. So this story is a little bit wild, but cameras were installed for the safety of doctors. But do patients who go into these wards actually have any clue whatsoever that they've been filmed?
It's a harrowing story. It's a harrowing thought. Short answer is no. In most hospitals, you're unaware of the fact that you may be filmed because there's no clear signage, which indicates that, which again baffles me, because I was sure that in any public area where you are, and a hospital to me doesn't feel like a very public area. Common areas, I understand, lift lobbies, receptions,
Yes, of course.
waiting rooms. This all makes sense to have cameras, but within the confines of a private room is baffling to me. Patients are not clearly informed, and nor do they need to be on private grounds in a private company. CCTV can be installed just about anywhere, and you don't need to be informed about it. Once you walk through that door, you've effectively waived your right to be on CCTV. But the stopgaps and the safeties that are in place in order to make sure that that CCTV doesn't fall into the wrong hands include things like a centralized hard drive, not having these recordings available on the cloud without deep double encryption. There are several measures that should be in place to make sure that this doesn't get out. 50,000 CCTV streams have now been discovered to be available. They're out there. They're being sold. They're being monetized across social media sites like Telegram and like YouTube, which is crazy. It's women who are being subjected to, at the time, they're going through pelvic exams, they're going through injections, they're giving birth, and all of this has been recorded. And again, CCTV, for the purpose of what it's there for, if it is there to protect doctors and it's kept under the correct lock and key, digitally speaking, that wouldn't be too much of an issue. It would live on a server somewhere where it's deeply encrypted and deeply protected. Unfortunately, in this situation, it seems like that's not the case. And it is so horrific to know that this video is out there. These videos, and of which we don't know how many there are, and we'll never find the true source of these. There's also been 0 complaints from any of the people who are involved in these or who feature in the videos out of shame or being discovered. And again, take it away, culture or otherwise. This is a deeply personal moment that somebody's going through, and now it's been exposed online because somebody didn't do their due diligence when it comes to the CCTV footage. And that in itself is a real, it's something that's
terrible.
horrific. It's horrific.
It's horrifying, honestly.
It just makes me feel absolutely.
I'm thinking as
shocked.
a woman, you know,
Yes.
that I go to the hospital, I expect privacy, I expect a certain level of, but I mean, it's horrifying.
And I mean, you said there's no complaints or people coming out, but I wonder if a lot of these people don't even know that this is available.
They probably don't know.
Because that must be something, how would you know? If
That there's
unless
a
you watched it
video of
yourself?
you circulating on the internet unless somebody finds it and sends it to you. I mean, what I find even horrifying is that on Telegram, you are asked to subscribe and pay for a subscription that would guarantee longer videos, from longer versions of the teasers that you've seen.
Yeah.
But it's really ridiculous, especially when such platforms like YouTube or Telegram are used for such things. I'm not an IT or a social media expert, but from what I know, at least on YouTube, there are rules and regulations that protect the content creators and the content that you put online. From what I know, that it needs to be reported. Obviously, YouTube usually has 3 strikes for each account. So if the first time you are reported, YouTube would send the content creator or the publisher a warning. But if basically the content was not removed, by the 3rd strike, YouTube closes the account. I don't think there is any of this on Telegram.
No.
I think it's
No,
encrypted.
it's no man's zone.
Yeah.
And it's usernames, as opposed to it being individual accounts. They're untraceable. You can't track back where that person is and who they are and what their IP address is. You've got no way of knowing the source of that. And it's where a lot of cryptocurrencies are traded, because it gives a level of what's called security, but which I think is just to fall under the radar. There is now apparently a vast, vast underground network of a demand for CCTV footage, from the average mundane things that are happening, like people taking the subway, to things that are as intimate as a trip to the doctors. And I think I certainly would conduct myself differently had I known that in a doctor's office, in a private doctor's office, or what I perceive to be a private doctor's office, was on CCTV. I think I would be a bit more reserved with regards to how you conduct yourself in that situation. You expect a level of privacy.
Refuse to take an injection.
Absolutely.
To start with.
And it is things like, even some of these videos they're saying are just people who are being given injections, and you just think, well, how is that something that somebody wants to watch? And you have to take in, is it something to do with voyeurism? But there is a demand for everything on the internet these days, I guess. But it really raises that concern about, you just assume that the CCTV footage is next to impossible to get, or that it's wiped over after 24 hours, or that it's safe. And I just don't think that it is.
But it's a real violation of privacy when we talk about this. CCTV, getting out from hospital ward, you know, you saying that there's now a demand for CCTV footage. That's quite distressing, because all of us do mundane things, and we will be on CCTV. And I feel, I don't know what you both feel, but it's a real attack on our privacy, just as a normal human civilian. And you were like, if I go into the doctor, I might change my behaviour. But the whole point is to go in there to get help for what's wrong, and to be open and to feel protected and secured.
That's very true. That's very true. And I think, I mean, if, as you said, you would conduct yourself differently, that if we know that we are being watched, not just in hospitals, in the street, in any shop, grocery shop that I walk into, maybe public toilets, God knows, you know, then yes, I would be looking over my shoulder all the time. I'm going to be so self-conscious. I'm not going to be able to live freely and comfortably.
But I think we don't. CCTV, when used the right way, is great. It's super.
It is.
Even when you put
it
into
saves
something,
lives.
of course, when you put into consideration that it might be a doctor who's accused of a wrongdoing, or if it's a public bathroom, somebody who's in there who's accused of a wrongdoing. If you have the CCTV footage, you've removed the element of blame. When it's used for things like that, it's wonderful. When it's used for something like this, that's when it becomes deeply disturbing.
And I also just wonder a little bit at the moment, we all becoming more and more reliant on our phones. And I always feel like when stories come like this,
we're being watched.
We've got to change our passwords. We've got to be more up to date with security, because I'm pretty lax on that. And I do often wonder if, you know, sometimes we just get used to how life is now.
And never take pictures and videos that you don't want anyone to see, because anyone can hack your phone.
And we've got to think about stuff like
access
that.
to those. Yes, absolutely.
And even I've heard there's now a WhatsApp scam where they can just phone. They don't even need, you don't need to answer. They can call your WhatsApp from a number from abroad. The zero-day attacks which are happening, which means that they can immediately get full access to your WhatsApp, including all of your pictures that you've ever sent on WhatsApp. And I just think that's a deeply terrifying thought.
Absolutely.
Two-factor authentication. But that's the thing, isn't it? Two-factor authentication is something that's so simple and so quick to action. And it's on almost all of the apps that you use on a daily basis. And I think it's somewhere around 48% of people haven't actioned two-factor authentication, which is a simple step, but adds a whole other layer of security to your life.
And I do that now, and I think that's really important, because, you know, sometimes I can answer the wrong email, you know. I might get an offer that's too good to refuse. You know, we get all these phishing emails. I've got to get better on that. But anyway, at home, everyone, you know, check your security. It's really important, and a story like that really highlights it. Now, it's that time of the show where Rawia and Jono have chosen their two quirkiest stories of the day. And Rawia, your story is about a hotel offering a very unusual wake-up experience.
You're not going to like this story, Leigh-Ann.
Let's go with it. Let's go with it. Let's go with it.
So a hotel in China is offering a new service, a wake-up call with a lion cub. Basically, you book the service a day before. It's usually between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., where they would come, wake you up with a small lion cub, and you are allowed to play to your room, obviously. You're allowed to play with the lion cub for about 7 minutes. in your room, and you need to pay around 628 yuan. I don't know how much that is, but I'm sure it won't be that much. So yes, it has become a big controversy. A lot of organizations that deal with animal rights have complained about this. They're opposing the use of such animals, in such services. But also, apparently, this is not the first time, because a similar incident happened in June where the service was basically a hotel has introduced a red panda wake-up service. So it's not just a lion cub, a red panda, but we have to also bear in mind that apparently the red panda are second-class protected species in China, while the lion cubs are first-class protected species, and yet they are used for such services.
I am so
outraged.
Vehemently against this. I am beyond outraged. I feel like I want to email the hotel myself. There's nothing that enrages me in the world more than wild animals who are meant to be with their mothers in the wild, in a hotel bed with children basically being rented out like toys. Yep. This is a wild animal. Where are they being kept overnight? In small cages. They don't have the freedom to have their parents. I mean, I'm sorry, and I'm sure people will be watching this, but I am one of those people who just does not think, I don't know, Johnny, your thoughts on this, but nothing about this is acceptable.
Look, I hate to see wild animals
I would
in
never
captivity.
book such a service.
And as cute as it is, because it's $90 is what it's going to cost you in US dollars, by the way. And I just think it's capitalising on, again, it's a wild animal. If it's cats or if it's puppies that are waiting for a foster home and it's trying to get an effort to try and get them into a proper loving home, and you can play with the dog or the cat to wake up in the morning, that's fine, because it means that justify the end there. But when it's a wild animal,
it's so cute.
And what happens when the line gets too big?
No, this is the problem. When they're cubs, everyone says they're cute.
Yeah.
Let's get the cubs and hug them, but they grow up into a wild animal
and
that then cannot fend for itself, and it's penned up in a cage.
Yeah, I always feel the same about owl cafes as well, weirdly, and I know that's a bit more mainstream, but when I see an owl cafe, I always think, well, what if that owl is here for a good reason, i.e. it can't fly, then fine. But if that owl has just been kept here for my entertainment, well, why is there an owl in a cafe? It doesn't make any sense. Cat cafes, that makes more sense.
That makes more sense.
That
or
seems
dog
logical.
cafes.
Or dog cafes.
But honestly, okay. We will. That is an interesting story.
I'm sorry about that story.
No, it's a good story, because I think that people have different feelings on it, and it's always good to have the discussion, especially when it comes to wild animals. I do love talking about animals. I'm not sure if I love talking about seagulls, but Jono, tell me about seagulls. There's a way to get rid of these flying rats, as they call them.
They do call them flying rats for a very good reason. They are a pest, and anyone who's been to a seaside resort anywhere in Europe, you'll be fully aware of how just horrific these things are. Not just to say that the fact that they have got, they'll poop everywhere, but aside from that, they'll also steal your food. So it's a double-edged sword. However, if you want to get rid of seagulls, it turns out the actual answer might be a lot easier than you expected. They've done some research to find out what's the best way to deter a seagull from eating your food, and it turns out you just need to shout. They've tried a couple of different things, lower male voice tones, saying get away from my food or get out of here or anything like that.
No.
That doesn't tend to work. Bird song definitely doesn't work. In fact, they're more attracted if they hear other birds in the area. They'll come over and try and eat your food. But a firm, no, stay away, that's my food, in a loud male voice.
Male voice?
Yeah, specifically loud male voice, scares nearly half of all of them off within a minute. So that's how you get rid of seagulls. And they're less likely to return if they've been scolded by somebody shouting at them to leave, as opposed to being gently told, no, shoo, shoo. So you need to shout at the seagulls. That's as crazy as you might look. That's how you get rid of them. Yeah.
That leaves you and me in an awkward position.
I know. We just have to feed the seagulls our food.
Or just make sure that we have a male with us.
A male with us.
Anytime we're near the beach or the sea.
But they're pests, aren't they? But I do find them, and this is when I went back home recently enough that I thought that when I moved away from Europe, seagulls seemed a lot smaller. So either prospectively speaking, my take on them was that they were smaller back then, but now I go back and they're flying turkeys. Like, these things are huge. So they're better fed now than they ever were before.
But I do think that the seagulls you get in the UK and Ireland are much bigger than the ones that I was used to seeing in South Africa
Really?
or in Africa. I do actually
That's
think that
interesting.
I couldn't believe how big seagulls were in the UK. I wonder if someone
Are
can
there
tell us
different
this.
types of seagulls,
I think
maybe?
they're a different type of seagull.
Yeah.
Because to me, they look like a flying dog. Like
Yeah, they're huge. Yeah, it looks like it's about to take your car keys and
Yeah.
get into it. And I do think
But in Africa, South Africa, they're much
But I think that's. I don't know if they're different seagulls. I really don't know the answer to this. But I do remember them being smaller, and I do think that it's to do with people feeding them more and they're eating more food, and I think they're just a bit more robust.
Evolution happens.
They're rotund
during your lifetime.
And that's what I think. I think it's been 15 years or 16 years or so. Seagulls have grown exponentially. I'd like to see some research papers into that.
But I must also say something, that they always attract so much attention, seagull stories, don't they? I mean, every time you ever look at the British media in August, it's a quiet season, everyone talks about how the favourite fish and chip shop's been attacked by the local seagull.
My daughter got attacked by, she was like 5 or 6, by some seagulls, and she's terrified until now. So now I'm going to tell her the tip.
Yeah, shout.
Make daddy
male
shout.
voice.
Take daddy with you.
Take
and
your
let him
dad,
shout.
make him shout. Yeah, thanks to our guests today, Al Arabiya senior presenter Rawia Alami and Jono Hayes, Dubai 92 presenter. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. GNT will be coming up next. Goodbye and thank you.